Hey everybody, welcome to Philosophy Friday. I'm a little worn out, Brett, this week, but we'll get
I
through
can
this.
tell, dude. I thought I was gonna be the one that was
I'm
tired
barely
coming
hanging
this.
on, but I'm here. I'm
Really?
here. Yeah. But the
Well,
topic. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing I learned in life working with Pete Parsons. I don't know if we talked about this. I know we talked on other podcasts, but
Uh,
this dude, he's CEO of Bungie Studios,
yeah.
helped create a few games you might have heard of, Halo being one of them. He was my boss in Seattle, and the one thing I learned from him, dude, this dude showed up every single day, fired up, like funny, energetic, like super excited about the product, and he was always surrounded by the best devs. And it took me a while to figure it out, but I realized if you can bring it every day, and it's hard, especially when you're a leader, it's incredibly valuable. So that's my pep talk, JK. So we got to bring it.
You know, we should in the future talk about different leadership styles, and we'll get there. But the topic for today
That's what I'm
will
talking about.
be employee feedback and performance reviews. And we're going to tackle both because they're generally linked at a lot of companies and an area which I think just about everybody can use improvement, including myself. I'm not professing to be an expert, but we'll discuss various systems commonly used by companies, high-level thoughts, and basically our philosophy towards feedback and performance. And I know I've got specific views, and Brett, you've got specific views. So maybe we should just jump right into it and start with, in terms of high level, in terms of feedback. Brett, what do you think are the biggest mistakes when it comes to whether it's both formal and informal feedback systems at companies today?
Well, probably the biggest thing is that they don't do it enough.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because when you don't do it a lot, it becomes a bigger deal, right? Because there's like more time between the time that you get feedback. So it's bigger, it's more dramatic, it's about bigger topics. I think a better way is to just do it all the time. Then it's commonplace, and you can course correct gradually as opposed to throwing down the gauntlet 3 months in. JK, we have feedback for you. Sit down. We've got 4 people in the room that are gonna, just give you this like fucking windfall of crap.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably the biggest thing. I think the other thing that we do at Liquid and Grit, which I think works well, is we think about feedback a little bit more as like editing as opposed to feedback for the individual, and we can discuss whether those are different, but I think they're kind of different ways to get at the same thing, right? If your feedback is be more diligent, right? Or you have to be more careful, that you can just give that feedback, right? Or you can just edit the crap out of their work and be like, yo, you missed a period there. You missed the title there. Why isn't this formatted correctly? Blah, blah, blah. Which is kind of how we err, is just like attacking their work product as opposed to kind of like attacking them as a person.
Right.
So,
But you have a situation in which, because you are generally oriented more around the work product, right? Where you're remote, for example. But I would say, or I guess maybe my question is, do you think that if you had more of a, in-person type of situation and you weren't oriented so much around the specific products, whether you would change that system to also address personal issues, right? So I don't know. What do you
oh
think?
man, I mean, we just try to avoid personal issues. I mean, I nip that stuff in the bud so quick. I mean, that shit I just am like
Yeah.
fucking gauntlet on, like no way, like all that personal stuff. I mean, give me an example so I can talk about it. But I mean, if you don't have work product, then I don't know what they're doing. I mean, I guess if they're a manager and then they're just you getting feedback from people, but I generally just feel like get after it right away. Like if you see something and you think that they should get feedback, what I err on is give it right away. Don't let it build up where you
Sure.
see 3, 4, 5 instances of it, and then you sit down with them and you have a really serious conversation. It's like if you see it, give it. And then what that does is it allows them to course correct. It allows them to understand exactly what you're talking about because it just happened. And probably the most importantly is allows them to build a thicker skin for
Sure.
getting it because they're going to get it all the time. It's not just like this thing that they're getting once a quarter. They're getting it every week, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and the way that I personally think about feedback is, first of all, I do think it's really, really difficult. I think it's a sensitive issue that people should take very seriously. And I think that if you get it wrong, people do often get very upset, and you can have attrition for stupid reasons, things like that. But kind of getting that out of the way, just kind of getting to the point, I feel like there are mistakes that are made in companies, both, or issues with companies, both in terms of giving feedback and receiving feedback. And I would say, like, the way that I kind of think about giving feedback is I kind of characterize people into 4 levels of giving feedback. And beyond that, I would agree with you, Brett, in terms of how you opened, suggesting that most people actually don't give feedback, and especially at larger companies, that's the case. And in some companies, depending on your culture, we talked about this before in previous podcasts, that giving real feedback to someone can actually get you in trouble. So obviously, you need to understand the culture you're in, you need to understand your organizational context. But for those organizations where feedback is welcome, which most companies profess to have, but in actual reality is not the case, I kind of distinguish people into kind of 4 levels of giving feedback. And I would say the first level are the people who don't give real feedback. And so, they just aren't able to give real specific feedback to people just because they don't have the emotional capability or the personality to do it. And so they'll either not say anything, or if they do give feedback, it's like, hey, Brett, Bill is kind of saying that you kind of have this issue, right? Hey, according to Sally, at meetings, you kind of talk too much, Brett, and you're not giving other people to kind of chime in during the meeting or something, that kind of thing. So it's not me, it's Bill or Sally or whoever. So that's kind of level 1, in my opinion. And then level 2 are kind of people who give light feedback, but then they'll shit sandwich it, right? Meaning, okay, hey, Brett, you're doing really great work. That last report that you published was awesome. But, let me talk to you about one specific thing that I think you should work on, and give you a little bit of light feedback, nothing that would be too confrontational or would hurt your feelings too much, and then end it with something positive. That for me, that's level 2. And then level 3 are what I would call, good feedback givers, which is really about having relevant and impactful feedback. But in my opinion, it's not delivered in the best way. And that's kind of where I categorize myself. Like, I try to give really relevant and helpful feedback, but my delivery is not the best. Like, sometimes I can come in way too over the top. Sometimes I can be way too direct. I can hurt somebody's feelings, things like that. And then 4, in terms of great feedback givers, in my opinion, it's like someone who can give the right feedback and deliver it in the way that has the most impact. And so this is where I think we mentioned before about personality types and things like that. I'm trying to study that so that I could try to become better. But I'm not, in my opinion, I am not a great feedback giver. And I also kind of liken that to, we talk about cards sometimes, right? And let me just brag a little bit, Brett.
Okay, go for it.
So I used to be an incredible poker player. There was a period of time where I became incredible. Like, and just as an example, there was this law firm Orc that held these tournaments, and out of like 5 tournaments I entered, I won 2, final table 2, and 1 I missed. I didn't make to the final table, but I didn't play that much. And the big change for me in terms of improving my game was learning how to play the man and not play my cards. You know what I'm saying? Like, what?
Yeah.
And similarly, I would say, like, when I talk about a great feedback giver, I would think about it in that way. So the great feedback giver is going to be able to play the man. How do I give this feedback to this person? And as I know we said in a 0 to 1 organization that, you like, you can't just adapt to everybody, but at the same time, I do think that a great feedback giver will be able to deliver feedback in a much more impactful way than a good feedback giver. And I am not great, just to be clear.
Well, I'm going to defend you here because
okay.
I kind of get sick of hearing that the feedback wasn't given well. I mean, it's a shit sandwich. So, I mean, you're going to just eat it. I mean, obviously, you don't want to come in there guns blazing and throwing F-bombs, although at your company you probably do since you love F-bombs so much. But
yeah, I do.
I mean, beyond that, it's generally, and again, I think we probably break this off. Like, feedback is when you're really sitting someone down and giving them feedback about who they are, or their personality or their impact or something larger,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a shit sandwich. It's not going to come out great. And I remember I would used to write out exactly what I was going to say because of it. It is
Yeah.
very sensitive, and you don't want to offend anybody and all that
Right.
stuff. That said, I'm countering that with no one likes to hear those larger things, and particularly if you've waited 3 months to give it, I think that's where some of the problems can arise. Is it's just really hard to tell somebody you're not great at something.
Right.
Nobody likes to hear that. So
Yeah.
there are better. And then my other point, JK, is
Uh-huh.
that just before you jump in is that you're talking about a theme that I brought up before, which is there's the emotional brain and the logical brain. And I think in those instances, this is really where you want to be tapping into your emotional side of your brain. And I have been personally on a journey to tap into my emotional side. And it's incredibly impactful in these situations where you can identify things that are happening in real time with another person much better with that side of your brain. And you can also be more impactful if you express that side of your brain.
Right.
And I think too often as managers or leaders, we come in with that logical side. Which I told you that's what I used to do. I'm going to write out exactly what I think, and I'm just going to write it out. I'm not going to react to what I'm seeing or react to what I'm feeling. And that's, I think, the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
I think you do want to prepare, but you really want to be in tune with your emotional brain and be able to react like, oh, the person's crying, I got to switch gears, or the person's not even hearing me or whatever,
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Brett, where when most people at companies say that you didn't give the feedback well, it's more around that person probably gave too direct feedback. But when I say playing the man and giving the feedback in the right way, I don't mean I mean more around like it's not about how hard you give the feedback. For me, that doesn't even matter. For me, it's about understanding the motivations of this employee, of the person I'm giving the feedback to, and then how do I deliver the feedback in a way that they understand it well, they understand the impact it will have if they were to change, and to align it with their personal goals such that they are motivated to make that change and act upon the feedback. So I am great at giving direct feedback very forcefully, but I'm not great at that playing the man, that other part where it's like, okay, they understand it. They know that if they do that feedback, how much it'll help them, and it's aligned with their goals as well. That part I need to improve. And maybe even talking on the flip side now, so kind of that's how I think about giving feedback. Oh,
Well,
did
let
you
me
want to
jump
say
into
something?
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did want to say something because I know you're a Jocko guy as well. But one thing I learned from Jocko's podcast from one of the books that he was reading was it was a German leader book about how there's sort of three archetypes of people that you lead. And there's one that you have to say, we need to take that hill. The second is, we need to go left and then right and then up and then round, and then you need to take that hill. And then the third is, we can't possibly take that hill, right? So there's three different archetypes. One, you just need to tell them the goal. The third, you need to be very specific. And then the fourth, you sort of need to have them be the leader, kind of prove that they're the one that decided to do it. And that really helped transform how I play the woman or man in that instance, right? Like if I'm giving feedback to different people, it's very different, right? This needs to be rewritten. This needs to be reworked. Could be just the feedback that they get versus some of the people, this word needs to change, and this one needs to change, and that needs to change, right? Or this isn't good. Right. And so I think that is really important, particularly as a leader, that you think about how you lead relative to who you're speaking with.
Right. And then on the flip side of giving feedback, receiving feedback, I do think that generally speaking, I would say more people are open to receiving feedback, in my opinion. But I would say that it's not so common for people to actually, so they can hear you on the feedback, but then to listen and act upon the feedback, I think is a lot less common. And so part of it is, I think that there are so many different kinds of people, and people have been raised in different kinds of environments. I mean, you mentioned, Brett, before that you were raised in an environment where it's like your dad was always giving you hard feedback. And so for you to receive that feedback, that's how you would, that's what you're used to. But for someone else, I mean, they could come from a family or previous working conditions where it's very defensive and you're trying to protect your, and and so I would say like the challenge with receiving feedback is just like the context and the history of the person. And then the other thing, you talked about the emotional part of the brain, but I also believe that sometimes, well, not sometimes, I do believe that generally speaking, people have a mental model of themselves. They think of themselves in a specific way. And the moment you attack that mental model of them, they can go crazy. They can get really, really upset and you
Hmm.
can hurt them and then, and then like lots of bad things, emotionally for them, it could be very bad. So I think that's the challenging part in terms of receiving feedback, just all the different kinds of people. And then how do you actually get people to, accept that feedback and then move on?
Yeah, a lot of the things that I build into my company are based off of human biases that I think I'm doing, right?
Okay.
And everyone else is doing. And two of them that I think in this case are happening is one is that humans kind of believe that they have more control over things than they really do,
Hmm.
right? They have sort of this. I mean, for lack of a better way to describe it, it's like a godlike thought. Like I can control Joseph, so if I say something, then Joseph will change, right? And there's sort of an over assumption that like you actually have more control over what's going on around you than you really do. I'm sure if you're in a relationship, you're married or something like that, you've probably learned this the hard way, right? Like you just don't have as much control over the people you're in a relationship with, your kids or whatever. So that's one. The other one is the assumption that humans can change very easily, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's another one that plays into it. If you're going to give someone feedback, I think there's an assumption that they somehow have the capability of changing themselves. And this is something that I've learned over time is it's actually really hard to change as a human, even the smallest little thing. And so again, I err on the side of giving feedback often and sort of repeatedly because
Yeah.
it's like you got to lower your expectations and also increase your frequency to be like, hey, you need to be more thorough. You say that today, you got to say it tomorrow, you got to say it the next day, you got to say it the next day, and you just got to let them work on that one thing because it's super hard. I mean, it's just hard to change. And so I think that's something that you have to remember when you are giving feedback. They're not going to just wake up tomorrow and be a different person.
Yeah.
That all
Eh,
said, I think your point is how you perceive feedback because we've been both speaking with the assumption that feedback when received is bad. And I know both you and I share one of the first things you ever told me, JK, is that you believe that feedback is a gift, right? And
yeah.
I grew up with two parents and even an older brother who gave very stern and blunt feedback constantly. And so I somewhat look at it as like a sign of love, right? Because it's like they want me to be better. They're doing it out of a good place, even though it can come off a little harsh. So I think both of us, because of our history, have been raised that feedback being positive. But you're right, like other people, kind of and sort of socially in general, feedback is seen as this like negative thing, right? Like you're gonna
Yeah.
get it, you're gonna feel yucky.
But to your point, I agree with you that generally speaking, most human beings do not want to change their existing behavior. So what does it take for somebody to change, right? And so there are soft ways you can do it, which is through motivation, trying to explain what the impact of a change could be, or to tie it to some type of performance evaluation. In order for you to get your bonus, in order for you to get promoted, you will need to do these things. Or you have to, but what I have seen is the most effective and why I would say you see sort of extreme behavior in a lot of 0 to 1 companies. And, examples are whether it's Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, you know, make this change by tomorrow or you're fired, right? So I do think that the changes to humans in a fast amount of time often do require extreme consequences, unfortunately.
I would definitely
So
agree with that. I mean, I think a good example. I completely agree with that. It's extremely hard to do. So if you don't put an extreme, intense lens on something, you will
Right.
not change.
Exactly.
And we see
Exactly.
examples of that in real life. I mean, I've um, studied AA, for example, a lot. I'm not an alcoholic or anything like that, but I have friends who have been through it. And one of the things I've learned is that they have a very intense thing in their life, and then they're going to examine themselves and examine what they're doing, and through this system, change themselves, right? But they
Right.
have that they have that risk of losing everything, dying, and all these other things. So they have that intensity. And at work, you have to bring that kind of intensity to something that often isn't necessarily considered intense unless a leader comes in and says you're fired. I feel like I'm a little bit 0 to 1 in my company, right? I'm a smaller startup. I would say I don't like that, like threaten that kind of leadership style. But that said, it's understood at Liquid and Grit that if you don't cut it, you will be cut. So
Right.
I don't really go around doing the whole yelling at people. I do say that though, when people are messing up, I do just let them know in sort of an honest way, if you can't fix this, we're going to let you go.
Right.
Because I don't believe that I actually have the ability to change a lot of people. We've talked about this before. I think it's a small percentage of people who can actually receive feedback and change themselves. And so I generally err on the side of we kind of have what we're going to get. And is that good enough? And if it isn't, you let them go. And not to beat a dead horse, because I know a lot of people have heard me talk about this, but you can do that if you have a inexpensive hiring and onboarding process. If you don't, then you are going to continually try to change this person, try to change the person, try to change the person, right? Because you're worried of all the costs to find a new person. So I think that if you have a very expensive onboarding and hiring process, you're more likely to try to change someone who can't change, and that's something that you can fix by solving the hiring and onboarding process.
Right. And I would say, just to the point on, since we are talking about 0 to 1 to some degree, I do think that, just speaking honestly about myself, there are a lot of conversations I really did not want to have. There are a lot of things I personally did not want to do. But if I didn't think there was an existential threat, unless I had this conversation, unless I did this, that we were going to die, I wouldn't have done it. But I'm the better for it. But I can imagine if I'm at, a company where it doesn't matter, I'm not going to have that conversation. I'm not going to do the thing that makes me feel very uncomfortable. I just avoid it. And so, to the point on changing human behavior, unless somebody out there has a better solution, I do think extreme consequences and stakes, as far as I know, are really the only ways to really impactfully and quickly make these kind of changes. Unless there's somebody out there knows a better way, please let me know.
I think this is a great thing to talk about because I completely agree with this. And I don't think enough companies think about it. When I was thinking about my company, we're both football fans. I thought about what would Bill Belichick do if he started a company, right?
Yeah.
And he would let players go like that, right? Like he's stuck by some rules in the NFL. But if he didn't have those rules and someone wasn't doing their job, he'd go find someone else to do that job for them, which he kind of does already in the NFL, but there's more restrictions on it. And there's no really free agency restrictions on being a company. So I personally think that letting people go is an extremely important an unfortunate part of business, obviously. It's unfortunate, but as leaders, we have to do unfortunate things, as you said, right? That are the best for the group. Because by keeping someone around who can't receive feedback and can't improve and isn't doing their job well, you are putting the rest of the company at risk, including yourself. And so you are actually doing something that's hurtful to all of the people who are doing their job well and are receiving feedback and are changing themselves, including you, right? And so I think that it's necessary. It's just a necessary thing that you have to do. And there's just a fair amount of them as a leader of any organization that you have to do. And if you don't do it, even if you're at your big company, you're going to pay the price. You're eventually going to pay the price.
Yes.
The business world, like, there's no sneaking by. There's no faking it. There's no one. The world will figure it out. If you're not giving feedback and getting rid of bad people, it'll catch up to you. It might not catch up to you now because you have a great product or whatever, and you're at a big company. But eventually that stuff just starts to catch up to you one way or another.
And maybe another topic to discuss, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, Brett. But for me, when I think about giving feedback, I almost think about it in terms of two different roles. And so when I think about feedback, I think about myself as a manager and as a leader. And depending on like which cap I've got on, which hat I've got on, I have a little bit of a different stance, right? And what I mean by that is that, and you mentioned Jocko Willink, one of the greatest lessons I've learned from his book, Extreme Ownership, is that the very definition of leadership, the role of a leader is to set the standard, right? And so when I have my leader cap on, I'm really oriented around making sure I protect the company's values and I maintain the standard of performance. And so with that cap on, if I see something happening, whether it's against our values or if it's against our standard of performance, then for me, the kind of feedback I'm going to give is a lot harder, more dramatic versus when I've got my manager cap on and I'm thinking more about the person and the team and how do I improve this person and, how do I'm more empathetic, I would say, with my manager cap on and I'm trying to, help versus with my leader cap on, it's for me, it's different. And I would say that that's the philosophy that I've adopted. And I know there are other philosophies out there where, I have, very smart people and very successful people tell me, as a CEO, you need to be the good guy. And kind of like the opposite, right? Which is like more like, don't give that hard feedback as a leader. But for me, what I'm saying is that from my perspective, when I put my leader cap on, I am pretty strict in terms of feedback, very direct, very strict, a lot harsher than when I'm specifically trying to help train or improve somebody with my manager cap on. What do you think, Brett?
Well, I mean, I can see how you separate the two because as a leader, you have to kind of make just hard decisions, right? And I think what you're saying is you have to be honest with them that bad things are going to happen if things don't change. And that's really the leader hat, right? Whereas the manager is really just trying to improve. They don't really have the control over letting people go. In your case, you have both.
Yeah.
But I do understand what you're saying. If you're a manager and you can't let people go, it's just part of the company culture. You're not going to be able to let them go. Then you're just going to have to constantly try to improve them. Whereas being the leader of an organization, you have to be, I mean, cold-hearted is a bad way of putting it, but you have to be very objective and numbers-oriented. And if someone isn't cutting it, then you have to understand that they're costing the company a lot of money and putting you at risk, and you have to let them go. And I think that the two other things I thought of was you were talking about that is one is you have to set the standard and that you are willing to receive feedback as well. And that's something I pulled from our culture is we have one of our initial bullets is speak your mind, show your work, and be nice. And in that it says everybody is a manager and including, everyone can be managed, including me. So you have to, as a manager or a leader, be open to feedback and be able to receive it and be able to change as well. And I think you need to invite it. And that's something I do in my organization because you have to lead. The second thing is at the end of the day, as a leader, everything that happens is your fault, right? Which is extreme ownership. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. We had a data issue recently and it was, there was some issue with that it didn't surface right, or we missed like a few weeks of data. And I could have easily said, well, this was this person's fault because they're the owner of data. But after I thought about it for a little while, I realized, well, no, it's your fault, Brett, because you didn't have a second person checking that person's work, right? And that is a policy at Liquid and Gray. So we have editors for everything. And so how can you basically hold this person to a different standard than you hold your writers, your editors, your analysts to, who everybody has an editor because it's extremely hard to be perfect all the time. And so I realized that, well, it's my fault. I need to fix it. And if this person isn't doing their job, then I need to get rid of them, right? Which is still my fault and it's still in my control. So I think that's another component of being a leader is at the end of the day, I don't really even like the word fault, but it's really that there isn't fault in people. It's just something that you need to fix, really.
Okay.
I just don't really think of the word fault
But for you
in
personally,
business.
Brett, you don't necessarily kind of view yourself giving feedback as different archetypes or in different roles. It's kind of more or less the same for you.
Well, we give. I definitely throw on my editor hat, and that's kind of what I think you call as manager. We don't
Okay.
do as much of the like quarterly reviews or anything like that. I just edit the crap out of everything. I mean, if I see anything, you're going to get a comment. There's nothing that if I think something at all, you're going to hear about it.
Right.
Pretty much. I mean, it's just a flurry of feedback all the time, and you just kind of need to learn that. And that's how everyone does it. If anyone sees anything, they comment on it. If I say something, they comment on it, if whatever. And so that's kind of how we do the management side stuff. The
Yeah.
leadership side, though, I do think is a different hat. It's a completely different hat because it's a
Right.
very objective decision making. The buck stops here. You cannot throw it over the fence and go, well, JK is not doing his job, so go home and bitch to your partner or whatever. Like,
Right.
oh, JK is not doing his job. I mean, that's one of the things about being a owner of a business. There's nobody bitch to because at the end of the day, you kind of control everything,
Yeah.
and so there really isn't any excuses for you. If there's a problem, you kind of have the control to fix it. So fix it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Brett, I like the way how you described it as objective based upon the role, right? So when you've got your leader hat on, your objective is protect the culture, maintain the standard of performance. For example, at least for me, and I would say, and so from that lens, how you give feedback and what kinds of feedback you're going to give is going to be different from, hey, I'm a manager, I'm trying to I'm trying to develop my team members. I'm trying to you're more person and team oriented rather than oriented around the different objectives. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about it in that way, but I think now that I think about it, that's kind of what I'm subconsciously doing. I think it's like when I'm giving feedback, I've got those specific objectives in my limbic brain, I guess, and
Well,
therefore
what I
giving
mean
that
by
feedback.
objective too is that you're
Uh-huh.
not thinking emotionally, right? You're almost just thinking in terms of the numbers of the company. Because
Right.
what I say is that if you're competent as an employee or a contractor of my company, and I control profit margins and our revenue grows, we both control our own destiny. But to control your profit margins or to make enough money to continue or raise money, whatever, you have to be very objectively minded, right? If someone's bad, they're bad. It doesn't matter if they're your aunt, your sister, they have, 5 kids or whatever. And that's the leadership side I think that you're talking about. And I do put that hat on after I see, like I saw this issue with the data thing. That person's going to get an email from me, which is, I understand this is my fault, but I want to I want to let you know that I've seen this several times, and if we see it again, I'm going to let you go. Right?
Okay.
That's just a leadership feedback. It's not even feedback. It's just telling them what I have to do to be a great leader in the company. Because I
Right.
have to protect the company and all of the people in the company and the profit margins of the company so that we can control our destiny. And to do that, I cannot have people
Right.
not doing their job well. Versus a manager, which is like they're producing stuff and I'm just commenting on it, making it better, right? There's no really
Yeah.
thought of the profit margin in that feedback.
Right.
I'm not thinking about the profit margin of the company or the
The,
revenue in your
the
case.
sense I get though from you, Brett, is that when you're giving the feedback, it might be pretty harsh, but you're running cool. And I guess, and what I mean by that is like for me, when I have my different hats on, I have a tendency to run hot when I have my leader hat on and run cool when I have my manager hat on, where, I don't get that emotional. It's like, okay, here are the mistakes. Let's kind of go over it. Let's walk through it. And let's kind of correct these things. But with my leader hat on, I do get pretty hot sometimes. And so like the emotions are definitely there with the leader hat on for me personally. And I'm not professing that that's the right way. I'm just saying that's my experience. And for anyone out there that has, a better way or has some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it. But
Well, I think that's just leadership style. And
sure.
we were talking about maybe doing a podcast on Jim Harbaugh versus Bill Belichick. But
Yeah.
Jim Harbaugh, if you know Jim Harbaugh, he yells and screams at his players, right, to
Yeah.
motivate them. He's a college coach, so he's different rules. But when he was in the NFL, he did the same thing, right? He's a screamer. He's going to motivate that way. Bill Belichick is going to scream at you. You're just going to show up the next day and be cut.
Right.
right?
Right.
They're kind of similar
Yeah,
but methods, but they're different. And
yeah.
I just personally am much more of a Bill Belichick. I'm a New England Patriots fan. I love Bill Belichick. I love his style, and that just fits me. I don't want to yell at
Okay.
you. I'm not here to babysit. I'm
Right.
not here to babysit. You're an adult. I'm an adult. If you don't do your job, I'm gonna let you go. That's how
Right.
we live here. So it doesn't. I do get heated a little bit, but they don't last long enough for me to get really heated,
Right.
right? Because to get heated is to imply that they're doing something that is isn't something that I can control, and I can. So I just, if they get to that point, it's like, okay, I'm sorry, but we're going to replace you, and then I don't get heated, and I try to stay objective with it. It's kind of, yeah. I do get I would say though on that, and we don't have a lot of meetings, and we've talked about that, but I do think that when I do get emotional, that is the time when I record myself talking to them or I jump on the phone. A lot of times, for example, I just did this last week. It was actually the opposite, where I was getting heated. It was
Okay.
Monday, and there was a case of the Mondays. There was three things that happened: the data issue, which ended up not being an issue, thankfully. There was a big presentation I had, and there was something that my lead analyst was complaining about. And it was something that I had told her not to start. So she's now complaining about something that she told me it was not going to be a big deal, but she started, and I was like, don't do this. Like, we don't need to do it. And she's like, no, we'll do it. It's easy. And then she's complaining about it. So you can imagine as a leader how that might frustrate me in addition to the other things. And so I did get pretty snippy with her because I was like, I told you not to start this, which was a BS comment. That was a bullshit comment. And so what I did was I turned on Loom. I recorded myself. I actually apologized for that comment because the fact that she said that she wanted to do it and I agreed to it means that I agreed to what she said. Therefore, I cannot go back and say, well, I told you not to do this. That's bullshit, because the next time she's not going to make a decision what she thinks is best, which is what I want her to do. And so I apologized and I recorded it so she could understand where my emotions were at. And I've done that when I'm angry too, because sometimes when I've given feedback to people, another instance, 6 months ago, or we had a little bit of a data issue as well, I was frustrated that the person didn't understand how important this issue was. And so I recorded myself. I actually called them, I think, and was saying, listen, I'm calling you because I want you to understand how important this is and how upset I am at this. I'm expressing my emotions to you so that you understand where my head is at so that you can respond correctly to it. Then I also added, if these issues continue, then I'm going to have to, I'm going to back it up, these emotions, by saying there are serious consequences. So I do think that that's a really good time to be talking to someone, because so much can get lost in Slack or email or anything like that. When you feel your emotions rising, that is, for me, the time when you need to get on a call and be seeing someone's face and reading as much emotional input as you can, as well expressing as much emotional output as you can.
Right. Right. And maybe we can talk now about, like, why do you think it is so hard for people to give like real feedback to others in a company? And maybe Brett, like, I know for maybe the other thing I can ask you is, what do you think people should try to do so that they can improve in that area? Because I'm sure there's a lot of, and even people in my company ask me, how do I do this? Because they feel it, right? There's this emotion, like, I have to give the feedback, but there's this mental barrier that a lot of people can't get over. And especially, I would say, people with technical backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, I've seen it's very, 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 very difficult for them to do that. But what do you think, Brett?
Well, I just have a lower tolerance for this stuff, right? I mean, I just don't understand why companies tolerate this. If you have people who can't get feedback, like, figure out a plan to get rid of them. And
Then you'd be
that's
getting rid
just,
of most of your employees.
I mean, well, no, my employees,
Well,
the ones
not
that I
you. I'm
have.
saying the world,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that a lot of companies should get rid of more of their employees. I mean, I come from professional sports where you would cut people very quickly,
Right.
very often. At Liquid and Grit, during the onboarding process, we cut people very quickly and very often as well. So I think you should have a lower tolerance for this. I think that just the working world in general has too high of a tolerance for these kind of things, you're in a professional setting. I'm on extreme on that, but I like to voice it because I think we're also on the other side where we got to like coddle everybody and you know,
Yeah.
I just don't agree with that. But I think the other thing is when you haven't done it for a while, that's when it builds up. And we talked about this already. If you make it smaller and more frequent, you don't have the risk of having this massive conversation and have big feedback. You want to be doing it all the time, and then they build up the tolerance for it. And you're talking about smaller things. I mean, it's a very lean methodology, thought process, right? And then I mean, we don't, we as humans don't want to hurt other people's feelings, but if you want to be a manager and a leader, you have to get over that because unfortunately, businesses, again, are about making products, making things, they're going to make more money than they cost. And to maintain that, you have to make hard decisions, you have to have hard conversations, you have to do uncomfortable things. And if you don't, then the world will do it for you. And the world will likely include you in that process.
Right.
So it's going to
Yeah.
come at you either way. Either way, you're going to have an uncomfortable thing likely happen to you. Either you opt into it, or you're going to be forced into it. So
Right.
kind of pick your poison on which way you want to happen. I generally like to opt in, right?
Yeah. And I think for me, the way that I try to encourage it at the company is by showing examples of it. So almost every meeting, I'm giving some kind of feedback to somebody. And not only that, then to integrate it into the workflow, right? And so to have a regular cadence of, because for me, it's like reps build the muscle. So more repetitions, getting the practice in. And then when people finally do it and they say, wow, it was not that bad, or, actually the feedback was actually taken well. And so that's kind of how I think about it. But I do know, like, especially difficult feedback, it is for a lot of people, it is scary. I used to be like that. I used to not be able to give direct feedback. And it took me years and years and years to get to where I am now, where, again, I don't even consider myself great as per my former framework that I talked about. But I do think that the other thing that people should realize is, so so I'm not Christian, but just to put that out there. But there are two biblical verses that I have as part of my values document, and I try and have people really understand the philosophy behind, or the thinking behind, why you should give feedback to other people. And hopefully that helps, so that from the perspective, it's not like, hey, when I give feedback, it's a bad thing. You're actually doing somebody a favor. And so, maybe I could just read a couple of these biblical verses. The first is from Leviticus 19:17. And by the way, I can read these biblical verses because I'm not Christian, so I'm not.
Oh,
No.
okay. I am Catholic Christian.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome to though.
But Leviticus, rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. And one of the things that I tell my guys is like, look, if you see something happening that's wrong or bad or can be improved, and you don't say anything, it is your fault. It's not just that person's fault. It's your fault because you didn't say anything. And the next verse is from Proverbs 27:6. Better are the wounds of a friend than the deceitful kisses of an enemy. And in a lot of companies, that's what you have. The deceitful kisses of an enemy.
Right. Well, you're going to pay the price either way, right? I think
Yeah.
that's I think whenever possible, and I think this is where it goes into debate whether this is feedback or this is just editing. Try to have it about work product. And I know everyone has a caveat because I have this very contrarian business, but when I was a lead product manager, it was the same thing. And I'll give you an example. But a little bit off work, but my son is a serious basketball player, really likes basketball, or he takes it very seriously, right? And father-son dynamics are very contentious. I mean, when you're talking to your son about certain things in sports, they can get really pissed off and vice versa. So what I do is I bring my iPad and I record the game. And then after the game, when he's very emotional, I don't say anything about the game. And then a day later, We review he wants to. He watches the game. We watch it together, and then we talk about what he might be doing. He could do better, or he might be doing wrong. But he can see himself doing it. So when he and I debate about it, the work product is right there. You're not, you're not doing this. Or no, I am. No, I'm not. And we go back. It's like, okay, well, let's just look at the video. Let's just watch what you're doing and see what you think. And then I can ask him, and he can convince himself of what he may be doing wrong. And that takes out the attack of the human, right? Which is you don't have enough effort, right? That's one way of saying something to my son about basketball, or it's one way of saying something to someone at work. Right. You aren't working hard enough. Versus when I show them the tape and I show them not running back on defense very hard, that's a much more tactical, specific thing that he can work on that will make him more intense. And so I think whenever possible, you try as much as you can to talk about the work product, talk about something specific, because it removes the attack on the human. When you take an attack on the human, like you are not thorough, that is attack on their personality, and it actually doesn't give them a lot of
attack on their mental model of themselves.
Exactly, their mental model of themselves, right? And it also doesn't give them a lot of information and insight as to what to do about it, right? If I say, JK, you're not thorough enough, well, I've given you nothing to really go off of other than your own device of improving, and you're old enough to have tried to improve it on your own. So how are you going to continue to? So I think that's really important. And at a certain point, you have to, if you get feedback in that instance, and they get pissed about it, then that's when you got to kind of call them out and give them the shit sandwich, because the shit sandwich sometimes just has to happen. And I had to give my son the shit sandwich, and I think when you do, and I would go back to this, tap into that emotional side and be as authentic as you possibly can, because people can read it, try to be calm, but be authentic, right? And that's when I'm talking about the decisions I make with the business. I'm telling them, listen, I need to do this because it's what's best for the business and what's best for everyone at the business. I need to probably let you go if you can't fix this, because I'm being authentic, I'm being honest. It's an unfortunate part of business, and people can read that and they get less upset with me because they know it's coming from a place of authenticity. Just like when you probably come at people angry, they probably get less upset because they know it's coming from a place of desire to have your company do really well. It's very authentic. And I think when leaders try to programmatically be a leader and programmatically give feedback, that's when I think it just comes out disingenuous and more hurtful in some ways. So.
Right. And it does sound like the way that you're addressing feedback for your son in particular is you are playing the man. You're kind of adapting the feedback in a way that he'd be most receptive to it. And so I think that's good. So maybe now we could talk about feedback and the second aspect of the topic of today, which is performance evaluation. And I don't know if there are specific performance evaluation processes or systems that you think are better than others, or maybe you could just speak high level in terms of your current thoughts at performance evaluation systems in companies today.
I think I'm just a little bit too bullhorny about this stuff, but I just don't believe humans can change that much. So, and I think it's very hard. I think I talked about this before. I see a psychiatrist every week. He's amazing. He's like a life coach with 12 years or over a decade of education to improve me, right? He tells me that 9 out of 10 people he meets with doesn't change a thing about them. And these are successful people in Marin County who are paying a lot of money to talk to a person with a degree. And he's telling me 9 out of 10 people don't do anything. So you're telling me that you're a manager and you went and you listened to some silly podcast or read some Medium post, and now you're going to change somebody? I just don't believe that. So I think that in my business, we just don't put as much into the performance review because we just don't think that a lot of people can change. And then we constantly edit, right? So, and I think that's been my experience in previous companies as well, not just in my company. I've experienced a lot of different systems, and I generally don't think that they work really well. The one that I did like at Zynga was it was written, which it was quarterly, and it gave you a number, and then it referenced that number the next quarter. So it would be like, you need to work on being more collaborative, you're 3.5 out of 5. Here's an example. And then the next quarter, so it was frequent, you would look at it and say, you've gotten better at it, and here are the reasons why. So I think if you're going to do it, I think that's a good way to do it.
Right. Yeah, and I think for me, the kind of the types of performance evaluation systems that I've seen at different companies is actually, let me start that again since this is since my thing went off. So from my perspective, the kinds of performance evaluation systems that I've seen typically in a lot of companies are really first around performance targets. So generally by quarter, you should achieve these things, and then based upon whether you achieve them or not, as there's usually like a manager to direct report feedback around other things associated with the performance targets. There's also like a 360-degree performance evaluation where you get, it's a form filled out by a bunch of different folks. Sometimes it's anonymous, sometimes it's not. I think that in the case of the 360, I think that's better in terms of feedback than getting feedback from your manager directly, which oftentimes depends on, well, I would say in either case, it depends on the people, right? It's not necessarily the format, it's more the people giving you the feedback and the incentive that they have for giving you feedback or not. And then I also see, which is a mistake, in my opinion, OKRs being used as performance review systems, which I don't think they were intended to be used for. And so I feel that, in my opinion, most performance review systems in companies are not good, and that they are largely ineffective. And this is an area I think where a company that does it right can actually achieve pretty dramatic gains in terms of actually being effective at helping improve the people in their company. And maybe I could just speak specifically to what we do. And again, I'm not professing to have the best answers in the world, but I can tell you what we've tried and what's working the best for us right now. And so we have a two-tier system for feedback and performance evaluation. So we like and I believe it was introduced by Deloitte Consulting. I'm not sure, and we may have talked about this before in terms of start, stop, continue. But for all of my reports and even my co-founders, I would have, at the end of the month, I would create a start, stop, continue with very specific feedback, including like very specific examples, that gives them direct feedback in terms of how I think they should improve or things that they need to improve to be more effective. These are all informal, and we're going to be rolling it out to be 360 and things that are not formally tracked by the company, but should be person to person. And then every quarter, we do have a performance evaluation system. It sounds a little bit similar to what Zynga has done, but we use the Airbnb performance review system that we found in a first round capital blog, and we follow that system pretty much almost exactly. And I'll put a link into the system, but this is a system that would involve creating, highlighting specific development areas, collecting peer feedback, and being very specific in terms of examples and things like that. And so, and as well as having specific targets in terms of things that you want to accomplish for the quarter. So that's kind of what we do. And right now, I would say, again, coming from a bunch of companies where we really didn't do performance evaluation very well, it seems to be working better. But again, I don't want to profess that I have the secret formula to doing this perfectly.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's not a strength of ours. But I think that if I were to implement it, it would be some combination of the two, where I would have 360 review, so I would gather feedback from a lot of people. I wouldn't have that information go directly to the person, because I think another important part of giving good feedback is giving the right amount. And just going back to my son, when we go into the next game, I tell him one thing on offense and one thing on defense to work on. And I think that's really important, that you don't overwhelm people with, here's this and do that and do this and do that. If it's bigger, right? If it's going to be quarterly, then just give them one thing. Let them accomplish that one thing. Prioritize and execute, which is a Chaco term. Gather all the 360 reviews. As the manager, read them all and figure out what is the most important thing, right? Because there's tons of feedback that you get that are not that important, and it's very hard to change. So prioritize it, and then say, okay, this is the 1 or 2 things I want you to work on this quarter. When you get those things done, then I'll tell you number 3, right? Because like you give these massive drops of information in a 360 review, and it's very hard. And then maybe you're going to fix the 20th most important thing, and what good at the company is that? So I think that's probably how I would do it if we implemented a more formal feedback system, as a 360 review with forms, anonymized, that went to the manager. I don't know if I would anonymize them, because sometimes anonymized can just be like hate like comments, and I think people need to own up to what they're willing to say.
Yeah,
that goes to the manager.
we believe the same thing. I don't like anonymous.
Yeah, anonymous just becomes like hate mail. It's just like bullying almost, and then the manager or whomever was providing the feedback would. Oh, this is actually something that I implemented at Liquid and Grit that I think is an interesting concept. I can't believe it's taken this long to do it. But one thing I did for my leads was, I don't like management stuff. A lot of the management stuff. I just understand that about myself. I'm not really into it. I'm not really into working with people to improve. I don't know why. It's just not something that really drives me. I think it's kind of exciting, but on my list of things that I really want to do, it's not high. So what I did was I hired this Navy SEAL who actually kind of knows Jocko to be the sort of like leadership coach to my leads. And if I had feedback, I would give it to him, and then he would work with the leads on it, and he would talk to leads about it, because he could give really valuable information about it. And I think what it was nice about it too was that my leads were probably annoyed by me the most, right? So if I'm giving them feedback, their counter to that feedback is likely something they're not going to say, because they don't want to offend me. I'm their boss. So they're just kind of eating this shit sandwich without being able to throw the shit sandwich back up the chain of command, which I think they can here, but in a lot of cases they can't. So my solution to that was that I hired this Navy SEAL, and they met with a person, and I told the Navy SEAL and my leads, if you have some feedback for me, and you feel uncomfortable, tell it to the Navy SEAL. I'm meeting with this guy too. He's giving me feedback. He'll just give it to me straight. And he's had tons of training and experience on leadership and overcoming adversity and all these things. He'll have tools that he can tell us about, right? Like, he's a professional. And I thought that was it was a pretty cool system that I think I'll probably implement as we grow, is I'm going to outsource this sort of like management development to somebody who is more experienced, more knowledgeable, and honestly cares a lot more than I do about it.
Right. And I think it's interesting when you talk about having like this third party. I used to be a management consultant, and I remember for certain projects, we would go into these big companies and everybody knew what the problem was. They just didn't want to tell each other. So it had to be like this third party that came in and just, we're like the political grease, right? Hey, surprise guys, but you all told us this is the problem. But anyway, and then maybe the
now pay us $1 million.
And maybe the last thing that I'll mention in terms of related to kind of feedback, related to performance evaluation, is kind of like this notion of skill expectation. And so the other thing that we have is something that we call a skills development matrix, meaning for every specific role, we have, okay, if you are a PM, a senior PM, a lead PM, director PM, and then we have different categories of skills: quantitative analysis, game knowledge, live ops. Like, we've got different categories, and we have specific expectations in each of those categories for the different levels. And then against that, what we then do is we would schedule a meeting to then have a high level evaluation. What do you think? Where do you think you are at for each of these various categories of skills? And then from there, we would then break that down into, if you're missing here and you want to get to the next level, what are all the things that you would need to do to try to get to the next level? And then we create a list. Here are all the things that you need to do to improve in this skill, this skill, and this skill. And then we would prioritize it and then North Star it, meaning, so here's a list of things that you would need to do to get to the next level, but we're going to work on these one by one. And it's up to you. You choose when and how you want to develop these skills, but we prioritize, they go one by one, and then we evaluate every quarter.
I like that. Yeah, they had something similar to Zynga, and that's great because it allows you to have very clear things that you got to work towards to get better and check out boxes and things like that.
Okay.
I think that's good. I think the one last thing I wanted to add, because we are getting in an hour here, and I know we're
Yep.
both tired, is that we didn't really talk about it. We'll talk about it very quickly. Is receiving feedback, because I do think that this is a skill in itself, and I think probably the biggest thing is that receiving feedback for everybody can feel like eating a shit sandwich, even the people who are the best at it, even like whomever is the best at it. I feel like it's just one of those things where it's like running or writing or whatever. There's no getting around the hardness of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can separate the time from when you respond to eating the shit sandwich, that is really key. Because if you can just hold your breath, don't say anything, maybe say, thanks, let me think about it, let me get back to you. If you can just separate the time from when you respond to it, that's key, because you can remove the emotional side of it and you can get over that negative feeling that we all generally have when we receive things like that, and then look at it objectively and decide whether or not it is good feedback, and if it is, what you're going to do about it. So that's the last thing I just wanted to add about feedback.
Yeah, I guess for me, I agree with you. I do think that I would just recommend reps. The more feedback you get, the more you're gonna get used to getting all sorts of different feedback. The less emotional you're gonna get, in my opinion. But I remember, working with people where somebody sent them an email and they're literally, it's ruined their day. This mean email with some feedback in it. And then they're like writing this angry email back, and then they're circling around and they're like, ah, and it's like, my God, what the fuck is wrong with you? Right. But like, so different people take feed, to your point, like about cooling down and things like that. I think that's fine. But that's why I would also highly recommend for any company that's serious about feedback, in my opinion, and I don't claim to be a world's
No
expert.
caveat here, Jake.
Yeah, but like if you integrate it into your workflow, have a monthly start, stop, continue, have people practice giving and
Yeah.
receiving feedback, talk about it in your all hands meetings in terms of the importance of it and what it could help potentially do and why it's important. Then I think over time, maybe when you get that angry email, instead of being upset for 2 hours, you're upset for an hour, then 30 minutes and 20 minutes and 5 minutes and 1 minute. And the next time it's just like, okay, yeah, I got this feedback. Oh, whatever, moving on. And last point, Stoicism. So, so learn Stoic philosophy. And I do think that really helps, at least the thinking side of why, okay, somebody said something mean to me, somebody sent an angry tweet or email or gave me bad feedback, just I think you understand the rationale behind just shrugging it off.
Or examining it as something that
Yeah,
is
exactly.
an
Trying
information.
to take from it
Examining
what
it
you can.
as objective as you can.
Yeah.
And I will add, because this I think is everything is a strength and a weakness. And I will say one weakness of being someone who's receptive to feedback is people can take advantage of that. So also be critical about thinking whether or not it is good feedback. And again, try to avoid the emotion side of that, because I think you can eat too easily. And don't fucking care about how it was presented. Get over it. It's not like that. It's not always going to be presented the right way. Maybe you say that, but still review what it was. And I think a lot of people will go, well, it wasn't given to me, in a nice way. Well, and then they'll stop there. They'll stop and not think about the actual feedback itself. So I think though, but be careful, because if you are someone who thinks of themselves as being good at receiving feedback, then my guess is you're a little bit of a pleaser, or a lot of a pleaser. And people can take advantage of pleasers, and they can kind of browbeat them into changing and changing and changing and changing. And soon all of a sudden you're someone that you may not have wanted to be, or you're doing a lot of changes that might not be good changes. Not all feedback is great. So I think that that's also a good reason to really objectively think about it. You get feedback from someone, if it is something that you aren't going to be good at. Like I got a lot of feedback, for example, that I needed to be less blunt. I don't think I'm ever going to be good at that. So for me, it was a sign of I need to change companies or I need to start my own company, right? Because I don't think I'm ever going to be less blunt. I'm Catholic and Christian, and it's against kind of my values to sugarcoat stuff. So I thought about the feedback and I realized, you know what? There's other things I'm going to do about this. I think the feedback is right for this culture. I'm not right for this culture. So there's more than just taking feedback and just listening to it and just addressing it. And I think that's really important. So.
All right, guys, for Philosophy Friday number 5, feedback and performance review systems. That's our Friday, and we're out. Thanks, everybody. Catch you next time. Bye.